Good evening. I'm Andrea Green, Director of the School of the Art Institute at Chicago's Visiting Artists Program. As the school celebrates its 150th anniversary educating artists, designers, and scholars, it's our great pleasure to welcome Kunle Adeyemi to SAIC this evening. This program is presented in partnership with the William Bronson and Gracie Slovett Mitchell Lectureship in SAIC's Architecture, Interior Architecture, and Design Objects Department, and also presented on the occasion of the inaugural Chicago Architecture Biennial that opened just this past weekend. Each year, SAIC hosts a variety of presentations by internationally recognized artists, designers, and scholars to foster a greater understanding and appreciation of contemporary art and culture. So we are honored to add Kunle Adeyemi to our rich history of distinguished guests, and I would like to thank him for taking the time to share his practice with all of us this evening. At the end of the lecture, we'll have time to take a few questions from the audience, and our staff will have microphones circulating for your use, so please raise your hand so they can get to your question. So thank you again for joining us this evening, and now I'd like to welcome Jonathan Solomon, SAIC's Director of Architecture, Interior Architecture, and Design Objects at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Thank you.
Well, there's interesting stuff on this podium. There's a limestone rock here. Good evening and welcome to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Before we begin, a quick announcement to members of the American Institute of Architects. Tonight's program qualifies AIA members for 1.5 learning unit hours of continuing education credit. If you would like that credit and you did not sign up for it on the way in, you can see Ryan Deemer in the lobby of the auditorium afterwards to sign up. Additionally, I'd like to thank Andrea Green for her help in making tonight's joint presentation possible. And I'd also like to extend thanks to Douglas Pancoast, Jacqueline Jakunski, and countless others at the school, students, faculty, staff, who through the Department of Architecture, Interior Architecture, and Designed Objects, and the Brenda and Earl Shapiro Center for Research and Collaboration worked to help ensure that this visit by Kunle Adeyemi has a lasting and reverberating presence on both the school and the city. More on that soon through Kunle's presentation. What might global architecture be? Asks Donald McNeil in his 2009 book, The Global Architect: Firms, Fame, and Urban Form. For some, he continues, it reflects the logic of the free market or transnational capitalism. Here, it equates with cultural homogenization, leaving a rash of seemingly identical airports, office towers, and new town developments scattered across Germany, Thailand, and Australia. For others, it has meant the sprinkling of iconic or would-be iconic structures in capital cities and regional centers, be they museums, parliament buildings, or universities, consumed and registered as the backdrop to television, car adverts casually registered from the front of a postcard, or not least, consciously visited in an ever-growing circuit of international tourism. If none of these places sound particularly pleasing to you, just sit tight. For into this context, tonight's speaker, Kunle Adeyemi, brings a practice that is challenging and ultimately redefining what it means to be a global architect. Born and raised in Nigeria, Adeyemi studied architecture at the University of Lagos, where he began his early practice, before attending Princeton University and joining the Rotterdam-based Office for Metropolitan Architecture, or OMA. A product of two of architecture's most global institutions, Adeyemi locates architecture, its clients, its products, and its values in its local impacts. On an informal settlement prone to devastating floods in Lagos, Adeyemi's Makoko Floating School employs local materials and local knowledge to empower a community to improve its own infrastructure. The result is a building and an institution that works with unstable natural systems and embedded social networks rather than against them. Such an approach contrasts sharply with global practice exercised as a tool of global capitalism, epitomized in Lagos by projects such as Echo Atlantic, the artificial peninsula, promoted on the one hand as an African version of the neoliberal global city, cousin to enclave projects such as Manhattan's Battery Park or Singapore's Marina Bay, and on the other, questionably, as a bulwark against rising sea levels. For the 2015 Chicago Architecture Biennial, Adeyemi has partnered with faculty and students from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. to develop and build a small structure on the shore of Lake Michigan. His approach here in Chicago produces a different product. It does not float, but employs the same process as his work in the developing cities of Africa, and reflects his conviction to examine his context closely. A local material, discarded as waste, is repurposed as both a narrative of the city's physical history and of its cultural future. Sensitive, earnest, and complex, Adeyemi's could be the first post-growth global architecture. Kunle Adeyemi is principal of NLA, an architecture, design, and urbanism practice he founded in 2010 with a focus on research and design for developing cities. As a member of the Office for Metropolitan Architecture, he led design, development, and execution of several large, prestigious projects in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. These include the Shenzhen Stock Exchange Tower in China, Qatar National Library in Doha, and Prada Transformer in Seoul. He served as a member of the International Advisory Council for the World Design Capital 2014 and a juror for the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2014. There, see, now I'm calling it a biennial. Thank you, Chicago. Also in 2014, Adeyemi was Baird Distinguished Visiting Critic at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. Previously, he was the 2011 Callison Distinguished Visiting Lecturer of the University of Washington and has served as visiting critic and lecturer at institutions ranging from the Guggenheim, New York, to Harvard University, to the Architectural Association in London, the ETH in Zurich, the Chandigarh College of Architecture in India, and the Delft Technical University in the Netherlands. Please join me in welcoming Kunle Adeyemi.
That was great. Thank you, Jonathan. That was a bit of a life history. Thank you, everyone. It's such a great pleasure to be here. I am incredibly honored. I want to start by saying a big thank you to a very special person. I brought that person a present. It's a rock, because she's a rock star. And that person is no other person than Sarah Herder. You'll get this later. Sarah has been incredibly instrumental in bringing me here, of course, but also, I think, doing something very important in redefining Chicago in its position in architecture, or bringing it back into that position. And the biennial, with the help of the team and Joseph Grima, and of course the mayor and everyone else, the last few days have really demonstrated an incredible turn of events, which it's been thoroughly enjoyable. So, and again, a big thanks to Jonathan, Douglas, the SAIC team. They've been really wonderful in collaborating with us on the project that I'll be showing today. But speaking, just to take all of this back, I'm just really here to share stories and tell you, share a snapshot of where I'm at in the middle of a long, exciting journey. And that journey has brought me to a point where I have found passion in two things specifically, cities and water. And I will tell you shortly why I think those are two important elements in today's world. Of course, we're set today in a very exciting context that is of water and city. This is Chicago. I think Chicago is one of the cities that actually demonstrates the extreme and maybe, one of the most beautiful relationships between water and cities, in its height. But that doesn't come without challenges. Of course, we've seen, I'm sure a lot of people have gone on the boat tour. If you haven't done the architecture tour, please do it. It's a great way to experience the city. And at the same time, it's also a way to begin to see some of the issues that I will be talking about today. So the two important challenges I always refer to of our time are one, urbanization, which of course is what is a product of cities, and we know cities are now defined as man's greatest invention. And sometimes I really think that while that is very true, it is also a situation that if we're not very careful, we could see cities as potentially man's deadliest invention. Cities are places of opportunities, but they're also sources of the crisis that we're experiencing in different parts of the world. Poverty, energy, pollution, waste, all kinds of things. And one of the second, I would say, challenge, which is also a product of cities, by and large, is climate change. So the previous image you saw, of course, is of New York, one of the epitomes of cities, great city development all around water. The next image, taken by Iwan Ban, is the same view of Manhattan after Superstorm Sandy, where half of it is shut down by flooding. This is just a short image of Chicago that I took a few days ago. Nothing to be afraid of. It's just I just thought it was nice to show the relationship between water and cities. Anyway, so Jonathan has introduced my practice. It's called Kunle, and that really means at home. We're an architecture, design, and urbanism practice focused on developing cities and communities. And we are, in fact, a business practice. And a lot of people think, when you have a social and environmental consciousness, you cannot be a business practice. You probably have to be an NGO. And so we're really a business practice. And I think, the home is a fundamental building block of every society. And so that's really what the Kunle is about. Before I started Kunle, which was 5 years ago, I had the great opportunity to work in different projects, what I would call super sexy projects all over the world, and incredible experience that I've been very grateful for. At Kunle, we continue to do super sexy projects. We're doing big buildings, fairly large-scale buildings in different parts of the city. But we are also very interested in a new breed of work, which I call the super sexy, serious projects. And I will show you some of those, 3 specifically. And the first is Makoko Floating School, which perhaps a lot of you know of. The second is Chicoco Radio, which is a radio station in Port Harcourt. And the final project is Rock in Chicago here. All of these projects, I think, and the others we work on exemplify a bit more of what we are, where our focus is about. It's about sustainable development, and not in terms of the checklist of sustainability that we all know, from all those credit lists, but really about responsibility, and that development, sustainability is about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I really think that's, it's a very eloquently articulated definition, which is really not about, which is really just about responsibility, that, it's about economy of means, it's about a lot of things, and if you embody that in your work, then you really, on day-to-day life, then you'd be practicing sustainability at its core. Like I started, I think urbanization is actually one of the great challenges of our time. At the same time, also huge opportunity. You know, cities, we know now that there are more than half of the world's population live in cities. And it's said that by 2050, nearly 7% of the world population will live in cities. So, and what we're beginning to see is that kind of agglomeration of people is happening around Africa, continent, some of it in Asia. And, but what's, of course, a fact is that we know that, you know, the territory that we're all struggling to occupy, these land masses only covers about 30%. So 7% of the earth is actually covered by water. It's kind of interesting to know that we're only living on 30%, which is even far less because of the regions that are accessible. And what's even more interesting is that nearly 7% of the world's capital cities, large cities, the ones that are rapidly expanding, are by water. But then more specifically, we found out that actually in Africa, where there's a lot of urbanization happening, again, nearly 7% of the African capitals are by water. So I mean, at this point, I actually thought I should write a book called Architecture for the 70%. So it's no surprise that most of the cities are around water, because of course the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia is a settlement on water. You know, water is, of course, a resource that is just natural. It's you know, you need it for agriculture, for transportation, etc. So, so that really is just the basis, that there's a natural relationship between water and cities and humanity, in its sense. But yet we seem to live on land and not turned into fish. It's quite surprising. But we will see some of that happening soon. Now, so while we're dealing with the issue of urbanization, there's also the second challenge, which is climate change. And although Africa is said to be the least responsible for climate change, it's actually the most affected by it. It's said to be the most affected by it, with, you know, a lot of these areas, regions along the coast being within the high and extreme high risk zones. You know, the issue with climate change is that a lot of people think it's a very abstract problem. You know, CO2 emissions, nobody really cares. You know, we continue our day-to-day life, but the impact of climate change that we begin to see every day is flooding. And I particularly like this image because, of course, on one hand, we see that, you know, people are struggling to get out of that condition, you know, in their SUVs. But, you know, in the foreground are these gentlemen already having a blast. You know, they're literally sort of adapting to the situation. They are, you know, it really shows the resilience of people to, you know, extreme conditions. And for me, this is perhaps the key or an insight to ingenuity and innovation of people, and that, you know, if there's a problem and you look very closely into that problem, it will suggest or contain a solution. So one of the first project I would show, of course, is set in Africa's second largest city, in Africa's largest nation, and the world's largest black nation, Nigeria. And the growth of Lagos has escalated a lot in the last few years. It's projected. It's currently 16 million people, and it's projected to be over 24 million in a few years. So, it's quite interesting that you see the trend of growth in African cities. May 2000, the Economist magazine published The Hopeless Continent, and 10 years later, it's the rising continent. So this sort of extreme development or extreme change became a point of interest in my research, and I sought to ask, why is this happening so quickly, and where is this development happening on the continent, and what type of developments are happening, and who are the key players in such developments. And with 4 years ago, on the back of a project, we began this research called the African Water Cities Project. And last year, I had the opportunity to teach a research and design studio at Cornell, where the students, we developed a methodology for sort of investigating these questions called the 7 decima factors of development. And DECIMA simply is an acronym for demographics, economics, sociopolitics, infrastructure, morphology, environment, resources. So, these are what we think are the key drivers of development, not necessarily architecture as we know it. I think architecture is actually just a tool, or design is a tool that orchestrates and sort of puts all of these issues together into a physical and built environment. So with demographics, we began researching, the impact of urbanization, looking at where the growth patterns are happening, and of course, very quickly you begin to realize that one of the outcomes of urbanization trends is the prevalence of slums, and which are also happening in those areas that are developing rapidly, also along the coast. We try to understand the large economic players on the continent, and I think the image says everything. Where is the foreign direct investment coming from, the large foreign investors, and how they are acting on development, social politics, government systems, cycles of government, all kinds of issues that affect development history. Infrastructure, water, of course, is an important infrastructure, ports, cities, airports, and roadways, road networks. Morphology of the city, where you have highlands, lowlands, where you have waterways, the kinds of constraints and that prevent cities from developing, which in a way almost produces a predictable result. Cities almost grow organically if you look at them from a very macro scale and in terms of their morphology. The environment was quite interesting, Of course, one thing we know is that, one of the most important parts of the world, of the globe, is the tropical zone, the tropical belt, and that part is where there's a high degree of biodiversity and climate and, rich resources. And Africa, of course, happens to have the largest area of the tropical zone in all the continents. And one of the things that we are beginning to realize is there's a shift in that in the intertropical belt. I'll get into that in more detail. Resources, finally, a lot of emphasis has been placed on oil as a resource, and it's no news now the impact of consumption of oil and the trade and how that also has a direct impact on climate change. So the result of that was really, first of all, an identification of 20, what we call the top 20 African water cities. And these are cities that, we identified, they're the points of convergence of issues of urbanization and climate change. So where are the cities that are growing rapidly and also most vulnerable to climate change? And these cities are points that we're now researching. We've looked at Lagos, we've looked at Dar es Salaam last year. We had the opportunity to look at Luanda to a certain extent. We're looking to kind of go around all these. This is sort of our to-do list of African cities. And last year we produced this draft document, which is the first it's yet to be published. We hope we can have that completed this year, but it's really a documentation of all of this information, and some of the interesting things are the rankings that we were able to produce from that research. So so this is really sort of a framework of how we think about work, we think about projects, we think about the challenges of any project and the solutions or the opportunities that can be harnessed from that context or that project, and the drivers of, and how that has an impact on the environment and ultimately within the city that the project exists. Makoko Floating School is one such project that, in retrospect, was a very good example of how all of this, this sort of thinking came together. I would make an assumption that a lot of people know about this project, so I'll go very quickly over it. It's been published a lot, so I'm sure you'll be able to find it online. But it's set in the heart of Lagos, which is, in fact, a city that has nearly 30% of its surface area covered by water. The context of the city is such that people sort of go around here. There's a little missing link at this point that is yet to be connected, but essentially once this link is established, the city will have a ring road that would allow development to go in all the direction a lot better. And the heart of the city, ironically, would then be just a body of water. And set in that heart is already some evidence of that existence on water. And that existence is called Makoko in Lagos. Makoko is a settlement with almost no land, no real infrastructure, no roads. It's an interesting civilization of people that have migrated from different parts of the continent to settle as an outcome of urbanization. They've been there for several years, and they are a fishing community and a sewing community. But what's fascinating is that they've just been able to create this incredible settlement, incredible civilization on water with very minimal infrastructure. So they live, this is how people sort of just live in Makoko. This guy is literally he's just built a house on water. He doesn't need anything else but just his house, his home, a platform. This is his bathroom, his kitchen. He's got like loads of kids kind of standing there, 5 of them. He moves around with that boat. If you think about it in some sense, he probably has most of what he needs to survive. So in a way, Makoko for me represents maximum urbanization with minimum means. This is, for instance, how people shop. This is your 7-Eleven. Now, the government, as a response to the pressures of urbanization, also thought at some point that, listen, you guys can't keep expanding towards the waterfront, and that's on one hand. And on the other hand, we want our city to grow. We want to have high-rise buildings. We want to have much better things than what you have here. So we're just going to demolish most of these things and get rid of it. So in 2011, there was a massive demolition exercise where nearly 2,500 people lost their homes, and it was quite a traumatic situation for social and political situation for the community and the government, and it became quite a heated condition. And at the time, it also coincided with a period where I visited the community and I was thinking about affordable housing, actually trying to solve a problem for the city. And on my first visits, I was really just, blown away by what I had seen. And, on one hand, extremely shocked by the conditions that they lived in. And on the other hand, also just really inspired. And the fact that they could build so much almost out of nothing. And I was asked to help build an extension to this school, which was subject to flooding every time it was built on reclaimed land. So working with the community, and doing research and, with influences from some of our partners in the Netherlands, and a lot of community engagement. One of the first things I did was actually to learn from the environment, learn from people who had built so much. And we developed, just understanding their local technology, understanding how they build. They build on stilts, they sort of have these buildings, with a nice roof form that throws, gets the water off, but it's all built on stilts. But the soil condition is really poor, so once in a while, the buildings are sort of falling apart. And on the other hand, because of the increase in rainfall due to climate change, the houses get flooded from time to time. So we devised a solution that was, something, I would say, sort of a global solution that wasn't really like an invention, but something that would adapt to the changing conditions. And we decided to use almost everything that how they build, understanding exactly the materials, the techniques, and create a whole, a different structure that would work with the flotation device, and essentially a hybrid solution of local and global technology. While we're thinking of how to get the building floating, I saw these kids actually solving that problem. They've been doing it for, years, just literally anything they could find, they would use as flotation devices. And it occurred to me that, hey, wait a minute, we're in Lagos, and they've got all these tons of barrels that are recycled because it's a port city. Why? And they've got, and the community also logs wood and brings it in. This is sort of right within the community. It's a sawing community. That why don't we just use the local material, literally within 50 meters. So we strapped a few of them together, and the kids jumped on it, and that was indication of success. I couldn't even stand on it, but it's very interesting that the balance and their adaptation to the environment is really peculiar, but once you get a hang of it, it's absolutely fun. So we strapped 16 of those together, multiplied that, and created sort of 100 square meter floating real estate, and extended that into the structure using the wood to create this structure, which again became their sort of party venue. And that's the structure there. I'll just go through very quickly. You know, I like to say it's a very imperfect, you know, it's a building that is really far from perfect, but actually makes everything around it perfect. It leaks, like most great architecture. It's become an interesting landmark for the community. It's you know, it's the highest point where you sort of see the whole city. It's the first 3-story building. I mean, in itself, you know, it's not like we've really invented anything new. Floating houses, you know, has been built all over the world. But you know, the ability to think about the resources locally available and think about the fact that this structure that is somewhat not quite a house and is not quite a boat is, you know, 3 floors, 220 square meters, built out of local materials with 8 men that are unskilled carpenters within the community, using nothing more complicated than a hand drill. You know, I think it's perhaps remarkable. So the impact, of course, you know, we've had a lot of, you know, provided a space for the community, but I think one of the most important things that has happened is that due to the global interest and international attention that it's received, you know, there's a lot of visibility and media attention, and we thank you all, the press people. It's, you know, I think the ability for the world to appreciate the work has also had, you know, a sort of a catalytic effect. A lot of publications from all over the world, and it's very interesting. We still get people saying, you know, it was built two and a half years ago already, and people say, oh wow, we've just discovered this building. It's like, yeah, can we publish it? Okay, yeah, sure. You know, it's undercover architecture now. Please get your copy. It's the latest copy of the publication. Is that it has all that attention, and of course with all the works by other partners and people that have worked in the community and the pressure, it's actually caused the government to rethink the policy and rethink, you know, their position on the community. And this was a publication, a press briefing only 5 months ago, that they would regenerate the community, and they actually had a picture of the school acknowledging it as a potential prototype for the community. So for me, this is perhaps the most important achievement of the project, its influence on policy, its ability to legitimize the community, and really you know, have influence on people's lives. And finally, the students are now really in session in the school, and the school has been handed over. So our vision is, of course, to build, we've built the school today, and maybe in the future, the prototype and other prototypes can be used to develop community, schools, hospitals, you know, homes, et cetera, et cetera. So something that is part of the environment, something that belongs there, and at the same time is very different. So that's the first project. The second project is Jacoko Radio, which is set a few kilometers away from Lagos in the Niger Delta region. It's an area that is a lot more complex. The society is a lot more, you know, I think they're much more skilled. It's an oil city, oil and gas city, so there's a lot of expertise, let's say, in production. So our ambitions became even more complex to sort of match with the resources and intellectual capital that they have. The people are well educated and, you know, experts, but they also had, you know, they also live in informal settlements called Okrika Waterfront. And a few years ago, they were also some of the settlements were demolished by the government with this pressure of urbanization that we need to develop, we need to create new places, new spaces. I'll go very quickly. I mean, it's also a culture that is about water, but they're a very different culture in terms of they don't really live on water, they live by water. And I'll show you a video very quickly. This video sort of demonstrates.
You see this place where they are? Now water before. Where our papa them come down and fisher people. They can't carry this mud, big mud, come stone here. As you see this house, it's deep inside the ground. All here now money they take by, all here now mangrove. Then cut them. This place where you see so. Now here they born me. Now here my mama and my papa marry stay born me. And here she died. We carry her go that way, go bury her. As you see me, I done it 56 years. These 56 years where I did so, I never go any other place. Now here, even another town, I never go, not any place. Me, I'm from this place.
So these are some of the community members.
I don't know whether waiting with the here, whether they want push us to the way here. We don't know. If they want carry us to the way, we don't know where to go. Me and my picking them.
And you see the kind of talent and human intelligence and capital within this community.
Hey, let's sing it. Respect, man. Oh, what you shoot? Respect, man. Also, everything nice, man. Respect, man. Bless. Bless that nigga. Let's shoot. So tonight the music sings so loud. Careless whispers you could witness proud. Baby, it's better this way. You wanna look for another way, you wanna stay. The fear, the respect, you were so dead on. Sensation, I see the wrong things you stuck in my ship. The Isle of White, the Isle of White, the Isle of White, come on, we must be strong.
Can we give a round of applause to this? This is improv, just really improv, and I mean that's a kind of talent within this community that is, defined as a slum. And for me, again, it's a source of inspiration, and people like that, you want to create a place for them to express themselves, develop their talent. And they had the site working with an NGO called CMAP. We were invited to help build a center. And one of the questions we asked very quickly was, where do you want this building? You have very scarce resource. You don't have a lot of land, and you constantly sort of develop, you sand fill the edges. Do you want it on land, on water? Half on land, half on water, and their response was actually that they wanted something that was somewhat, on land and somewhat on water. They're not quite people like Makoko, yet they have history on water and culture on water that they want to restore. So it immediately became a project that was more of an amphibious structure that was partly on water and partly on land. And the thought was that, well, why don't we use this as a model for sort of urbanizing their waterfronts, where you create public spaces all around the edges and freeze the edge to make it a public platform. And through community engagements, they were asked to vote what kinds of things that they, spaces that they would need, whether they need bank, costumes, place, practical swimming pool. They didn't vote for the swimming pool. They voted for the radio station. And of course, having seen that kind of video, you'd understand that music is a large part of their culture, and they just need a place to have a voice and to speak and to sort of communicate their thing. So we looked at the program very quickly. We developed it with them and with CMAP, and part of the program was to also build a 40-story mast, a 40-meter mast. And we decided to sort of organize the program in a linear way to sort of match this relationship between land and water. And since we're going to build a mast anyway, we extended that to use it as a harness, to mobilize it as structure, to lift the element above the street, and to create public space underneath. So that mast became the structure that would sort of hold a very lightweight timber space, timber frame to create a radio station. So essentially it's just a mast that is suspending this element, and that has a platform, so creating shade over this, and has a platform that that adapts to the changing conditions. So the more important spaces are away from flooding. So it's a very, structure is a lot more ambitious than Makoko, but within the environment, it's not. It's much more possible. And then you've got wood. They build boats and they do all kinds of steel structure using wood locally, where the plan is to do that. Create spaces and hold on, and hopefully have space. There's a terrace, so the slope creates a terrace where they have performances, market spaces, cinema, and the kids can watch, or the musician can do his performance. So they actually did this jingle.
For new sports, music, live streams, and discussions. Oh yeah, don't touch that dial. You want to Chicoco Radio.
Our voice.
So the radio training has actually begun, and the community is very excited. CMAP is raising money, so if you go to their website, do not hesitate to click that button. The final project is ROC, an opportunity that we received from the Chicago Biennial to be a part of Chicago, this wonderful city. And I will take you through it very quickly. This is the model sitting there, and we have it also at the Cultural Center. Sets in, of course, the city. Looking at Chicago is a particularly interesting city for me as in terms of its architecture. The fact that it's a city that has, modern, developed modern architecture. We have it's like an architecture heaven for in most parts, and the industry of prefabrication and all kinds of technologies for building is actually quite advanced. So we're not quite talking about Makoko or Chicoco or Krika here. Yet, for me, it's an opportunity to still think about these issues from the same principles. The project is supposed to sit at the lakefront, in lakefront of Michigan, which is which of course contains a large percentage of the freshwater supply in the States. At the same time, it also is a region that is subject to harsh weather conditions. The cultural landscape of Chicago is incredibly interesting and diverse. And this is our site on Montrose Beach, where of course, it's a melting point of all kinds of cultures, people getting married, and people, having barbecues, And the weather conditions of Chicago, for those of you who live here, I'm sure you'd really understand that you you have extreme conditions, to say the least. So it became very evident that whatever we did, which it started out as a very modest request from the biennial to just do a really simple kiosk, became for us something that needed to be a lot more robust and resilient. And then we began to look at the environment itself, like what really lives on that edge, what really lives on that lakefront. And we, of course, looked at the condition, and we found a lot of these sort of revetments, limestone blocks that have been used, that were brought from Indiana in the 1930s to create this shoreline protection. And a lot of them have now been taken out because they've been replaced by concrete. And they've been actually stored in a place in the south side of Chicago. And we also realized that some of the community in Chicago have been saying, asking what can we do with this, with all the limestone, So it's actually a resource that is just there, almost abandoned, but has been put to good use. This is our fine model and collaborator showing the potential of this great resource. Thank you, Douglas. And we also kind of looked at what we could do with limestone and the kinds of other materials, or the idea of repurposing materials in Chicago. And the site, of course, how people use, and the relationship between man and material, that even though it's a very raw material, it's still a place where love can exist. So this is our proposal. It's a concrete balcony that is a box that actually just sits over the revetments, the edge of the cliff, and is balanced by some of these limestone blocks. So this is just a model here, which shows that relationship. But essentially, it's overhanging here, and you have these blocks sort of holding it as a counterbalance from preventing it to go down here. So we've got 8 blocks supporting it, and then the roof is suspended, actually held in tension here, and this is also put at the edge to prevent it from uplift. So it's really this sort of delicate, but yet very robust structure that is almost like a sculpture. It's not really a building, and that's one of the points that we're not even permitting it as a building. It's really a public sculpture that sits on the cliff edge. Thank you, the Art Institute of Chicago. We imagine it as a location that is also beyond sort of, it could be a bar, it could be a place for concerts, and also, condition where, you can completely see how it reacts to extreme weather conditions, whether it's the sandstorms or the rain. And I mean, perhaps one cool thing about it is just that actually, it's it all just really it's in a box. So we didn't get the opportunity to have it built. It would have been wonderful to have it ready for the biennial. So what we had some permitting issues that had to be sorted out before the end of the year. It was going to be built early next year. So what we decided to do was to actually move the limestone rocks from the depository on the south side and take them on their sort of journey towards Montrose Beach. And the halfway stop point is Millennium Park. So they've been placed in Millennium Park, and where we also have our next model. And so they're at Millennium Park now on display as an exhibition, but also just for a place where we want the public to begin to interact with the limestone and begin to act on them, to build this relationship, but also to, we're going to be running a number of programs that we want people to come and carve them, write on them, paint them, do all kinds of things. And we had, on Saturday, we had sort of an opening event where we had a performer in the center and students. She was spinning for an hour. So we kind of imagine things like this. This is temporary, but we're going to get artists that would facilitate workshops with the public to begin to sort of put marks. Make you please go there and make your mark on the rocks. And the idea is that they would be moved to Montrose Beach and become part of the kiosk in spring of 2016. So finally, just to conclude, the idea, the thought of all of this is that, looking at all these kinds of cities, whether it's Lagos, that is a city on water, what we've learned from Lagos, Lagos is not the first city. We know Venice is one of the sort of typical or a great example of cities on water. We understand the challenges and the opportunities in Venice. What's interesting is that the first settlers of Venice were no different from the people of Makoko. They're called the lagoon dwellers. Cities like Amsterdam, and of course a city like Chicago. How can we learn from all these cities and begin to produce a new condition? And imagine, what if we begin to think of a space where all these kinds of conditions exist, an innovation bed where we develop sustainable, responsible, high-rise, dense buildings where they need to exist. And as you begin to get into periphery, you begin to become much more fragmented and begin to respond to the environment, create recreational spaces, lower structures. And as you get away from the edges, you can begin to have even recreational facilities. You can finally have your swimming pool. You can have play areas, you can have green areas, agricultural areas, transportation, and essentially create a new type of architecture and urbanism on water for Africa and for the rest of the world. Thank you very much. I will be happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
I was just curious why you chose Montrose. Maybe I missed it. I was just wondering what the decision-making process was.
Actually, we're allocated Montrose. I think it's a question for CAB, but we're quite happy with Montrose Beach.
They're actually the kiosk for site kind of spanning from the south side of the city to the north. Where you guys see is the 59th Street Youth Campus. There's one now at the media campus, at the film museum to film. Our teams will be at one down the beach at the relay at that campus.
Yeah. Question?
Thank you. My name is Olu Adeshida. I'm Nigerian like you, and I must say I'm proud of the work you're doing. I just wondered, those structures, the structure you have in Makoko, is there a time when they'll be more permanent? And I just wondered, what's the government's reaction to what you've done? Is there more optimism within your administration about developing those kind of structures in those areas?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned that we sort of moved from a position of resentment and, where the community was threatened for demolition to now a point where of regeneration, and that the school has been acknowledged as one of the structures that would be part of the urban plan. Where the regeneration plan has not been completely developed, and we're looking to work with the government in providing that and using the prototype and also other ideas for how you can develop architecture infrastructure on water. So yeah, that would be the idea, to sort of replicate that, but not necessarily only in form, but just really in sort of ideology. Yes, please.
Hello, my question is directed towards your intersection between your practice in Lagos and OMA, and wanting to know how that journey came about and sort of what the transition out of that into a private practice looked like.
Well, I worked with OMA for about 9 years, and when I started the presentation, I mentioned that it's really been a very important part of my experience. And, at some point, I realized that I could bring a lot of the knowledge I had acquired into, much more challenging conditions, or an area where perhaps is more relevant. And, I used to go back to Nigeria and, and saw that this was also a place of opportunity and a place where I could actually grow a lot more, and a place that needed perhaps the attention. But I think that's really the birth of Kunle as a practice. I just wanted to do, address problems that I thought were topical. But I think what's interesting is that it's the learning experience is so quick that I realize that what you learn from such an environment is already relevant to the rest of the world. It's not about just trying to do work in Africa alone. It's really a place to learn and understand and there are cycles of knowledge in a way. I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah?
You showed a picture of Venice,
right.
And I was curious if you had ever thought about a project there, or been approached, or would you like to do a project in Venice?
Are you a mayor? I would love to do a project in Venice. We haven't really had the opportunity to do something, but we're looking at, we hope we can do work there. That would be a great place to do some work. But I will say that you should, for the next biennial in Venice, Biennale, thank you very much. we might be doing something there. So, yeah. Yes, thank you.
Yes, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, who's that?
Yeah, here, over here.
All right.
So I was, after your presentation, I was thinking about cities that have a completely different problem with water. So I was thinking of cities that have been like tubing rivers, for example,
Right.
Thinking that it would be a better solution for the city to have the water instead of being on the surface, like really like keep it underneath. So I was figuring out or thinking if you have worked in any of these kind of cities where there's a different problematic with water. I'm thinking specifically of Mexico City, for example, no? Where all the rivers have been tubed, and now there's a big problem with the water, and there, like the relationship between people and water also changed abruptly because of that, and now there are projects that are trying to change this way of dealing with water.
Well, I haven't worked in Mexico, and to be honest, we haven't really looked at that specific condition. I know of the case of Mexico, and I know of other cities, projects that are about restoring the waterways, like Cheonggyecheon in Seoul in South Korea, where waterways that were previously buried have been opened up into the city. But yeah, it would be interesting to look at that particular problem. So if you have that opportunity, we'll be happy to work with you on it.
Kunle,
Yes, sir.
you mentioned that the Great Lakes were the source of water for 85% of North America, which I wasn't aware of. Of course, Chicago, in its own history, has had problems with its water source. In the late 19th century, they were polluting Lake Michigan at the same time as trying to draw water from it. You're in advocating for a formalization of settlement on the water. How do you deal with the pollution that comes from this type of informal or this type of water-based settlement?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think that's one of the main challenges of settlements on water, and I would say on land also. So it's not a peculiar problem. It's just it's an attitudinal change to how we deal with water. I think for instance in Lagos, cities or the city itself was really only 10 years ago the city was a real mess. There was a lot of pollution, a lot of garbage just dumped all over the city. But with changes in the culture, there's environmental sanitation every end of the month where at 10 between the morning hours and I think midday, no one leaves the city. You have to go clean the gutters. It's a complete, and that totally transformed the sanitation and condition of the city. I think the way we manage waste is a cultural issue. So people ask me, how do you manage waste on water in Makoko? It's the same way. You collect the waste in the garbage bin, you sort out your organic waste from inorganic waste, and at some points in the day, someone comes on a boat and you put it in a boat and it takes it out, and disposes of it. And if there's organic waste, it can be turned into compost or biogas. So it's not different. It's just that we need to think about the context that we're living in. Right now, Makoko is a real sanitation mess. And I think if this is going to be a sort of a new way of living, then they need to also cultivate a new culture for sanitation. Yes. Someone there?
I'm here. Thank you for a great lecture. in the beginning of the slides, you were showing these metropolis like Chicago and New York, and one of the issues that I didn't see addressed was the sort of like the extreme expense that these cities represent in terms of land value. And I guess I'm wondering if you've seen any kind of like alternative strategies developing in these interfaces with water, in that like how does sort of land ownership work in those communities? Have you seen anything that might like inspire an alternative model to what we have in current cities?
Sorry, how does alternative model to what exactly?
Well, to basically what I see in conventional cities is that you have a living cost which is in no way proportional to the material cost of living. You're basically only paying for location, and with an apparent kind of like unlimited space that the waterfront provides. Are there alternatives to that model?
Well, I mean, I think the good thing is that as for now, water, a lot of it's actually a bit of a paradox, because waterfronts are perhaps the most valuable real estates all over the world, right? Yet, when you actually go within the water itself, no one is really selling plots of water. So it's only a few cities or a few countries that actually have policies and regulations for living and building and on water, like Amsterdam, for instance, or the Netherlands, right? You actually pay almost as, if not more than you would pay on land to just get, plots of spots to actually park your boats, your houseboat. So when you're in Amsterdam and you see all those boats in the canals, they're actually paying a lot of money for that real estate. So there is a developed culture and a developed policy around how to occupy waterways, and they provide infrastructure. It's connected to the public mains, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think, if some sort of, if in the future there will be, that's part of that regulation, and that was one of the challenges we had with Makoko Floating School. The government said, "Oh, you cannot build a building on water. That's there's no, you didn't get planning permission to build it. We're going to demolish it, And we were like, well, it's not quite a building, right? You don't really need planning permission to have a boat on water. So it was really sort of in between. It's not quite a house, and it's not quite a boat. And it was really mediating a gap in the policy. So it's just now that they would have to sort of think around how that would be developed specifically. It's a complex thing to navigate, because then you sort of open up this capacity to develop, the waterfront in a certain way. But there are precedents all over the world, and I think they're very possible. Oh, okay, one more.
Hi.
Hi.
I noticed at the beginning of your presentation that you made a point of punctuating that Kunle is a business practice instead of a nonprofit or NGO. And my thesis research here at SAIC was on sort of emerging business models and how creative organizations can use them to create financial sustainability. So I'm kind of curious if you can just tell me a little bit more about your decision to pursue specifically a business model and how that might impact the public's perception of what you're doing?
It's a very good question. I haven't really thought about it a lot, but all I know is that, I think it's important to be that the result of the work that we do actually has some surplus to enable us to do more. That's all I know. And I think we're always looking to apply that. We're trying to grow, not necessarily as a business itself, but really the body of work that we produce, and it requires. So I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with a model that is non-profit. It's just a totally different kind of operation and source of funds, and and maybe some projects are much more funded through the NGOs. We're working with NGOs. We also get grants to do some aspects of our work. But I think it's important to know that, I think for me, perhaps more importantly, is that whatever we do in the field of sort of the social environment should also be applicable to even corporate and business organizations. I want to be able to apply the same ideology to a business venture that wants to do a high-rise building, that wants to do an airport. What does an airport that embodies the values of Makoko Floating School look like? So it's not about charity, it's not about poverty, it's really just about an ideology that is embedded in, sustainable development.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed the part where you talked about how sort of your team and you learned from the skills of the people at Makoko, but I'm curious now that in the event that this sort of school has become quite a landmark, as you said, have your building strategies been taken up by some of the residents there? Has there been, in that sense, sort of a transfer of skills?
I think, these things take time. It's been 2 years already, first of all, what we're doing is not necessarily cheaper than what they've done. It's in fact more expensive, and that's just the fact, because we've had to make things better. We've had to solve problems that they have, but there are many ways of solving problems, and we could have built something that was very different. So it's something that they would aspire to, and it's something that it's a solution that they've been part of. And I think one of the most important rewarding part of the project was when we were building, when it was under construction, and the residents would pass on their boats, and they'll be like, "Oh wow, this is so smart! This is so brilliant! That you have 16 barrels, and you've put them together, and it can actually support this amount of weight, and that wow, And we're like, "Oh yeah, we're going to go 3 floors." They were like, "Oh, you can go 10 floors because we know that this." They actually understood it a lot more than we did, and they are much more comfortable on it, in it, and it's something that they can maintain and deal with. So that in itself means that the intelligence is from within, and that's the most important thing, that it's cultivated from within. And if through policy with the government, that way of building is, let's say, legislated, then it becomes a standard, and you just have to improve the standard, and it's just a small improvement. It's not this completely imported solution. I think that's the key thing.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, let's do that.
Hello.
Yes, hi.
Oh, that's loud. Thank you so much for coming, by the way. I also really enjoyed the presentation. And I guess my question is, given the fact that we live in this age that everything is super connected and accessible thanks to, the internet and other means of virtual communication, how accessible are these architectural plans to anybody in the world?
You mean ours?
Mm-hmm. Like the one in Lagos.
Oh yeah, they're online. I mean, you can request for them. Send us an email.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.